All right, we are introducing our guest, Charleen Katra, who is coming to us from Ncpd. Deacon Matt.
Sure. Let's bring Charlene on camera as I talk about all the wonderful things she is and does. Hello, Charlene. Glad you're with us.
Hello, everyone.
Charlene Katra assumed the position of Executive Director at NCPD in December of 2019 after having served on NCPD's Board of Directors in 2018. She previously served as the Associate Director in the Office of Evangelization and Catechesis for the Archdiocese of Galveston-Houston. For over 20 years, her primary responsibility is directing the ministry with persons with disabilities. Katra is the co-author of The Adaptive Teacher, Faith-Based Strategies to Reach and Teach Learners with Disabilities, and the author of How to Talk to Children About People with Disabilities. She has extensive experience in systematic and sacramental catechesis and has served as a national consultant, author, and speaker on the topic of inclusion for various Catholic publishers. Katra is currently a member of the Loyola Press Speaker Corps. She holds a bachelor's in special elementary education and a master's in pastoral studies. That is a rich biography. Wow, you've seen it all, huh?
This means you're getting old.
Well, we welcome you to the show, Charlene. Why don't you just say in your own words, maybe just a little bit about yourself?
Again, I just give thanks to God for putting this ministry on my heart at a very young age, actually, and then leading me on a path through many wonderful opportunities up into including serving here at NCPD now.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're glad to have you. So one of the things that we wanted to do, and we'll show a picture of your book and the NCPD webpage. If we haven't done that yet, Steve, have we done that?
Yeah, I think that's a good place to start. Let's start with the NCPD website, and maybe you can tell us just a little bit about this organization, Charlene.
Absolutely. Simply put, following in, the model of Jesus himself, we really try to be as inclusive of persons with disabilities who are often marginalized in the world and no different in the church. And so basically our role is first and foremost working with diocesan directors to help provide training and resources so that they can in turn do the same for their catechetical leaders, so that persons with disabilities and their families are welcomed and feel at home in our churches, in our faith communities, and more importantly, that they feel a sense of belonging, because that's different. We can talk about that later, but that's really our goal.
And if you'd like to reach out to Charlene or any of the good folks at NCPD, there's an email address at the bottom of the webpage. So we'll mention that again before we part ways today, but just so you know, you can get more information here. And also you can follow them on social media, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Instagram. You can also sign up for the e-news. So sign up for the newsletter while you're at it.
And our producer, Debbie, just dropped a link into the chat, ncpd at ncpd.org. So that's a great address to go to. If you don't get your question answered here in the webinar today, Charlene and her staff will make sure to attend to that. So ncpd at ncpd.org.
Perfect. And so this is our Catholic organization partnership for supporting those with disabilities. And you just gave us a great description. In my time, I'm a convert to the Catholic Church and from the early 90s. But it seems like we're hearing more and more about supporting diverse learners. Why is that?
There's diagnoses on the rise, number one. I think that's a big one. In particular, I would park diagnoses of autism as well as some of the mental health and mental illness diagnoses. Those two are on the rise, again, in the world, no different in the church. So as needs are presented, more families are coming forward, and that's good, because on this side, I encourage families to do that as well. Present your needs. The parish doesn't know unless you do that. So we encourage them, but at the same time, trying to equally keep the training and resources available to the leadership to serve them best.
Well, that makes sense, and we are making great strides, and I've seen many efforts in ways of supporting diverse learners, specifically with catechizing diverse learners. We're going to get into that topic next, but you have also written, I think, a couple of books supporting diverse learners. Is that right?
Absolutely. I have done that, proud that I have done that, and I think especially because it seems like it's meeting a need for the people that are offering direct service in particular. And that's what it was intended for, to be very, not only pastoral, but more importantly, practical.
And one of the, I believe your latest release is The Adaptive Teacher, faith-based strategies to reach and teach learners with disabilities. Could you give us a highlight of that?
I mean, it is from everything from executive function is covered in there to sensory processing disorders to the difference between, a meltdown and a temper tantrum. And again, it relates to strategies for systematic and sacramental prep as well. And prep and celebration is also spoken about, of course, in that book. The whole idea of dignity of the person, naturally, the foundational beginning pieces of it. So, how to get and keep attention in classroom settings or any educational settings. So just really chock full of, again, as I said, practical tips and tools.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that.
I have a quick question for you, Charlene. You mentioned just a bit ago about diagnoses on the rise. Is it a matter of we're learning more about different challenges and disorders, and so we're able to diagnose better, or is it just more people are presenting with these diagnoses? How do you account for the rise?
I mean, they seem to say it's a bit of a combination of both, but I really do think that most, let's say, parents today, as well as physicians today in the medical field today, have just so much more information at hand in front of them now that they're more aware, coming earlier for testing. Again, doctors are knowing what to look for maybe earlier and sooner in life as they're treating patients and families. So I think it's just a good time where a lot of awareness has been raised and people are really seeking out, everything that they need, especially in the medical realm.
When we hear a lot about, in public education, steps being taken to support diverse learners, pretty robust infrastructure and local school systems and so forth. Let's look on the private side and talk about the Catholic Church, Catholic schools. Not to ask you to give them a grade like an A through F or anything, but how do you see the church, which includes all of its organizations, how well are they supporting diverse learners in your opinion?
My honest answer is better than ever. That's the good news. Better than ever.
That's great.
Yes, it is. Does that mean we're there all the way where we want to be yet? No, but I always say we're going in the right direction. But honestly, again, just what we're doing right now, the increase in access to trainings and resources has kind of imploded in, let's say, even the last decade, and even a lot in recent years, just because so much now is available virtually and often at no cost. So we have really been able to get into people's homes, and so a catechist, leader, priests, etc., can really pick up on things that are beneficial for them in their ministry. So in that sense, I think we're reaching more people, and that's always very positive. But again, in one way, the other side of me says we can't do more fast enough, because you still hear the stories. That's why I don't want to lose the other side of families that are still going somewhere and getting a not so welcome experience. So again, it's a process.
Now, in preparing for the show, you were talking to Steve and I about some pretty important foundational documents from the church. Would you mind talking a bit about those documents? And we'll go ahead and show them as you talk about them.
Absolutely. There's two main documents that are really the foundational documents for the disability ministry in the church. And those are the bishop's statements. So USCCB put out the pastoral statement on persons with disabilities. That came out in 1978. So 44 years ago. It's been around quite a while. Our office actually was birthed because of some of that work back in the late 70s. So our office, Ncpd, is now this year 40 years old. So we came into, at the calling of the bishops, into existence to serve as the national resource on this ministry for the church. But that's really the foundational one that really talks about who the audience is, how the church, again, like Christ, needs to be there for them. And just as we're talking about so much now with Pope Francis and the Synod and accompaniment and all the words of today that are, again, maybe different words, but it's the same message, right? Being Christ to others and accompaniment. So that document really is the foundation for that. The second document that the bishops wrote for us came out in 1995. That was the guidelines for the celebration of the sacraments with persons with disabilities. And that document, though it came out much more recently in comparison, it did luckily acquire a revision in just recently in 2017. So that document was revised in 2017, and it included now things that were not talked about, let's say in the 90s, celiac disease, feeding tubes, dementia. So again, it kind of brought us up a little more current even into some of those areas. And truth be told, and this is kind of hot off the press, but we're working right now with USCCB, just very initial stages of hoping to write another document like the original pastoral, but a new one. in coming years that will likewise update us more, even on foundational basis of information for what a diocese, a parish, et cetera, all of us should be doing, organizations, et
You
cetera.
just answered my question because I wondered if there was going to be a revision anytime soon. So you heard it here first.
You really did.
That's fantastic. Getting the inside
It's
scoop.
big. It's
That's
big.
exciting. And I have a kind of a follow up to that. So we're seeing, I know in the next year or so, we'll have a revision of the rite of penance. We've got the new OCI, not just the RCIA. So we're getting the liturgical books revised. As that happens, will there be revisions to the guidelines for sacramental reception book?
Well, because I would say probably not at the moment, only because it was just revised in 2017. Many of our audience probably knows it can take 2 to 3 years to get a document of that depth through the bishops' committees and the work that needs done.
Sure. When you told us about the documents in prep for the show, I went back, started reading them, and they're beautiful. And it's one of the things about, and we all know this, I imagine we have a lot of people in ministry on this webinar. Church writes a lot of beautiful things, and it's just a matter of getting that beautiful message out and people applying that beautiful message in their ministry. So good stuff.
And Deacon Matt, what you say, and I will say right now today, what we're doing is putting flesh on that document. So again, that's why NCPD exists too, in a nutshell. It's to put flesh on that document and help others do so where they live.
It looks like we've got a comment or a question here from Chris Miller. We're going to allow Chris to talk. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I'm a big fan of Ncpd, and I have a question for Charlene about my understanding within the Catholic Church, mental health or mental illness fits under disability. And I know there's been a lot of work throughout the country and the world to destigmatize mental illness and mental health issues. So I'm curious to know about our speaker's thoughts today around if mental illness should be considered a disability.
Well, usually, thank you, Chris. Usually when I speak about mental illness in particular, I usually don't use the word disability as much as I use the word diagnosis, at least for me. I agree, you're right. With the structure we have currently in our church, the mental health ministry is pretty much parked under, like, same as when I worked at the Archdiocese of Galveston, Houston, and still here. As you know, NCPD has the Council on Mental Health, which just recently, by the way, just changed their name to the Council on Mental Illness and Wellness. So it was the Council on Mental Illness. It has now recently been expanded, and even to address the fact that, again, it's a continuum, and honestly, we are all on it at different times in our life, right? From how mentally healthy we are or are not. So, and especially for those who are really have a diagnosis and have greater needs in this area, it is still currently under this umbrella of disability. So, physical, intellectual, emotional, behavioral, etc., is usually how I think of disabilities or diagnoses, under the big umbrella of disability ministry. And I don't know if that helps, Chris, but that is my thoughts on it. I think you and I know each other well. So, but I appreciate you raising awareness, because it's especially in this time we're living now, being attentive to the people in front of us and around us, be it children, youth, or adults, ourselves, family, friends. We can't almost pay enough attention to slowing down and being with people and checking the pulse on how they're doing in this regard. And then on that note, I'll add one other news flash, and Chris is a little bit aware of this as well. And it's something that our council's been working on, that Chris serves on as chair, actually, of our Council on Mental Illness and Wellness, is another conversation over next door. Our office is right next door, luckily, to USCCB, and that's a mental health campaign. So something coming from USCCB, which is kind of, for a lot of people, been awaited for a long time to have them speak more publicly. Some states have written statements on this specific lens, but it's getting close to where you'll probably start seeing something, we hope, during next year on that note, on a national level. So that's also really exciting.
Exciting news.
Yes.
It is. I really appreciate what you're saying about the question about language and the response that you gave, Charlene, about it. Because, I mean, especially in the church, certainly in our society and cultures today, language is so important, that in terms of identifying people and articulating who we are and what we're about and all this. And the church, just if you think about doctrine, how you strain at making sure we're saying the right words, to describe these ineffable mysteries. Language is important. But as you say, it's a living language, and we're all on the spectrum trying to understand it and get our heads around that. So I think that gives people room to feel not ashamed if they don't know the right language, but to give them time and space to acclimatize, if that makes sense. And I think that's really important for people who aren't in the know. So.
Right, because when we talk about, a diagnosis or a disability, whether it's mental illness or it's autism or ADHD, any of these, and they are labels, right? And in a sense, labels are passports to services. So for that, they are beneficial and people need them for that. Mm-hmm. But for us as church, and certainly I would say as a leader in the church and being as pastoral as possible, you want to move away from those, so to speak. You want to see the person. The other piece besides the bishop's documents, of course, for us are the other two kind of bookends, our scripture and our social justice teachings. And in particular, the foundational first one on the dignity of the person. So I guess I would just say that. So we lean into person first language. So it's Charlene may live with mental illness or a diagnosis of mental illness, bipolar, et cetera. But I'm always first, okay? And or there's a child in my class or a girl in my class who has a diagnosis of autism or ADHD, et cetera. So you always want to put the person before is another best practice that we often talk about, especially when you talk about language, whether it's spoken or in print. We created a document called Speaking of Disability. I think it also is available on Amazon, but NCPD put that out about a year or two ago. And it'll talk about, again, in verbal or in writing, disabilities, diagnoses, the deaf and hard of hearing, all those areas that, church needs to be, more educated in how to do that best in their bulletins or on their websites, et cetera.
Absolutely.